right, folks, President Trump sends his first federal budget to Congress today. The proposal is expected to call for deep cuts in domestic programs and a significant increase in military spending. But every year, the Congressional Black Caucus offers their alternative budget. Among the CBC's proposals, establishing a fair tax code that would raise nearly $4 trillion in new revenue, investing $1 trillion in infrastructure and community reinvestment projects, establishing a public health insurance option as part of the Affordable Care Act at a cost of $23 billion over the next 10 years, plus investing $250 billion on K-12 and higher education. Joining us right now is a member of Congress who lays it all out for the CBC, Virginia Congressman Bobby Scott, who is the top Democrat on the House Education and Workforce Committee. Congressman, how you doing?
Roland, good to see you.
All right, so for folks who don't know, I mean, the CBC has done this for a long time.
Good. Well, we've done it every year for probably 30 years. I've been in charge of it for about a decade. And what we do is outline an alternative budget. The president will offer his budget, and it would be interesting to compare what we can do with the federal budget compared to what they do. One of the problems that we run into every year is that the Republicans put forth a budget that violates arithmetic. If you listen to the president generally, he starts off with a deficit. He adds increased spending for defense, then he comes up with tax cuts, and then said that's going to balance the budget. No, it's going to make things a lot worse. You have to make some tough choices in budgeting, and part of the problem is we do this thing sequentially. You pass the tax cuts, then you say, well, we need spending cuts. Well, let's do them all at the same time. They've got in their healthcare repeal bill about $600 billion in tax cuts. You look at their budget, they have about $6 billion in cuts in HUD. Well, how about a $594 billion tax cut and leave HUD alone? That's a choice, and we never get to those choices. What the Congressional Black Caucus budget does is outline those choices. We say we need about $3.9 trillion in new revenue. Interestingly, that's what we passed all at once in the Cliff deal a few years ago, $3.9 trillion. We also point to other taxes that you can increase, a total of about $10 trillion, and out of that we need about $4 trillion. And so you show how you do it, what you can do, and then we show how we spend it.
We're seeing
we end up with a deficit reduction probably significantly higher than Mr. Trump's. He hasn't given his deficit reduction numbers.
We see in his budget he's calling for a $54 billion increase in defense spending. What does the CBC budget call for?
We're going to match the number for the Democratic budget, probably keep with baseline. After we eliminate the sequester, it may be fairly close because we eliminate the sequester, may be fairly close to Mr. Trump, but we show how you can pay for it.
We're already seeing when it comes to the budget they've already put out, when it comes to domestic programs, drastic cuts in EPA, some 30+%. Same thing for State Department, and they're cutting out programs for education when it comes to after-school assistance, helping poor students as well, Meals on Wheels. Also, veterans are upset because of the cuts in HUD, how that's going to impact housing vouchers for veterans looking for homes.
And so if you make the choices, you add up all those cuts, and then see you got tax cuts on the other side. In other words, those cuts are paying for tax cuts. Well, let's make another choice. Let's put them all up together and say whether or not you want those tax cuts. Some of these tax cuts are monstrous. I mean, $600 billion are in the health care bill. Nobody talks about how big that are. That's almost enough to pay for Bernie Sanders' free college. Certainly more than enough to pay for Hillary Clinton's debt-free college. Way more than enough to pay for the America's College Promise that I introduced, free community college with help for HBCUs. Let's make a choice. Do we want tax cuts for the wealthy, or paid for with all these cuts, or do you reduce the tax cuts and address the needs of the American public?
So the president's head of his Office of Management budget was on another show this morning, and was interesting to me. He talked about how, well, we're phasing all of this in, and they are presenting a budget on the assumption that we're going to have 4 to 5% growth, economic growth. When is the last time we saw 4 to 5%?
Well, you can help balance the budget. You talk about that growth, that'll increase revenues, and you have a phantom better bottom line. Ours is arithmetic. It doesn't need fancy or overly optimistic growth. It's arithmetic. You increase taxes and you spend the money, but you don't spend as much as you raise, so you have deficit reduction. It's adding and subtracting. And I will guarantee you that our bottom line is more credible and a better bottom line in terms of deficit reduction than the president.
So I remember in the movie Dave, there was this particular scene where the Kevin Kline character calls his friend in, who's an accountant, and he literally goes, "Who does your books?" He says, "I've never seen anything like this." And what is stunning to me that people at home even try to figure out is, and even Trump has talked about this here. I mean, you have these defense companies who literally will put in their proposals, "Oh, we know y'all gonna be late, so we're gonna factor in the cost overruns into the proposal, and then you guys are gonna pay for that." And there are people who have these projects, the federal government, who are late, and we keep paying them like it's no big deal. And when you look at, I'll talk about inefficiencies as well. Like, for instance, when the report that was done showing $125 billion in waste in the Department of Defense, I'm going, okay, if that's a report identifying $125 billion in waste, why would the president ask for $54 billion more dollars? Just say, General Mattis, get rid of the waste. Now y'all got your extra money.
Well, you can do those efficiencies. One of the things that the Republicans do is to cut the budget in anticipation. So we can cut spending $1 trillion, and then they pass tax cuts. Then they never cut the spending. And that's one of the problems. You talk about waste, fraud, waste, and abuse. If you can identify it and eliminate it, you have the money. But you've got to eliminate it. And what they do is say, well, there's $100 billion in waste. We're going to cut taxes $100 billion, and then they never get to the waste. And so they're always doing things sequentially, out of order, rather than all at once, when you can actually have control over the budget and make intelligent choices. We can address the needs of the public. Things like foreign aid. It's not that much in the budget. Tax cuts are way more than that. A little bit of money goes a long way in foreign aid. One of the things that we're dealing with internationally is people hate us so much that they want to do terrorism. Well, with a little help, maybe they won't hate us so much. We spent $1 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan over 10 years, about $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. If we'd spent a few $1 billion, maybe we could have avoided, maybe not, but we would have a chance of avoiding the war. That's a good expenditure.
Let's bring in our panel. Ralph Chittos, principal of Black Elephant LLC. Leila McDowell, Washington Bureau Chief for Rise TV. Ken Agood, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. So here's what's amazing to me, again, as we always go through this during this year when these budget proposals are offered. You have, obviously, different priorities, Republicans and Democrats. Ken, I want to start with you. What still amazes me is, as I look at Trump's folks say, "Oh, well, we're simply doing exactly what the president said." And I'm looking at all these broke white working class folks who voted for Trump. I'm going, y'all about to get screwed.
I mean, I want to know, where's the populism, unless you're a defense contractor. It seems as if they have made a real priority shift away from spending on programs that help Americans in the United States and shifted an enormous amount of the resources towards the defense budget. We heard Mick Mulvaney, his budget director, on TV earlier this morning, saying, like, I can't go to the American people and say, well, and get them to pay for these programs. Well, we've heard time after time after time President Trump say, well, this plane costs too much, or there's so much waste in the Pentagon, but they don't seem to be applying that same philosophy to their defense spending. And I think when you look at what the priorities that this budget from the Trump administration lays out, it's very clearly a shift away from the American people and towards the military.
Here's a perfect example, Ralph. So the Department of Transportation, they have what is called the Essential Air Service Program, which subsidizes flights to rural airports. That's going to get completely eliminated. I guarantee you, all those folks who really believe Trump is their guy, they're going to look at what's going to happen in places like Kentucky, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, all those places. They're about to get in for a rude awakening. So I think they won't be hollering, make America great again. They're going to say, make America broke again.
Well, we all agree that the budgeting process, regardless of who's in the White House, is a complete mess, whether it's a Democrat president or a Republican president. I think we'll all agree with that as a baseline.
Well, we won't agree with that on the baseline. When President one of the first votes I cast was a Clinton budget, which eliminated the debt. We were on the way to paying off the national debt by the time he left.
Well, when I say it's a mess, I'm talking about increasing expenditures, increasing the deficit, increasing revenues, taking more money out of the pocket of American citizens.
You didn't hear what I just said. We were on the way to paying off the entire national debt held by the public by 2008. When Clinton left office.
And it's the same thing that you just said before. What is said at the front end never gets cut at the back end. And that happens regardless of who's. And see, I'm not speaking as a Democrat or a Republican. I'm speaking, as a
Democrat.
Citizen
when
who's saying,
first vote I cast, that
we have
created
enough
a budget
money coming out of our pockets on a daily basis.
20 million jobs, and you just said that it was a mess. No, it wasn't a mess. When President Clinton left office, we were on the way to paying off the entire debt held by the public by 2008. But instead, we passed tax cuts that we didn't pay for. We fought 2 wars we didn't pay for, prescriptive drug benefit we didn't pay for, and all of a sudden we're back in the ditch.
And the last year of the Clinton budget, when he left office, when the president leaves office, that next year is still his budget, correct?
Right.
That next year, the deficit and everything else went up. That went up under the Clinton budget.
Well,
that wasn't the Bush budget.
That's
because the first year, it's still under the previous president. So I'm not speaking, like I said, I'm not being partisan. I'm just saying we need to stop raising the revenues in this country. We need to balance the budget. We do need to cut spending across the board. And we just need to tighten up the purse strings.
You need to make choices. You can balancing the budget. Budget has 2 sides: revenue and expenditures. If you're going to increase expenditures, you need to increase revenues, and so you just need to balance. If you're going to cut revenues, you got to cut spending. Unfortunately, the spending cuts are phantom. Nobody's going to pass a spending budget that eliminates the kinds of programs that you're talking about to make the president's budget work. And to say everybody does it, no, everybody doesn't do it. When President Clinton left office, we had passed a budget. I tell you what does happen, people demagogue it. When Marjorie Magoulas-Levinsky cast the 218th vote, the chant was "Bye-bye Marjorie," and she was defeated in the next election for voting for that budget that created 20 million jobs. 2008, we're going to pay it off the entire debt held by the public.
And 1 year after the Clinton presidency, the deficit went up.
I think what Congressman Scott is saying is exactly right. And the thing about a budget is that it is the vision of what kind of country you want. Who is going to be helped? Who pays? Right now, disproportionately, working class and middle class Americans pay more taxes disproportionately than the billionaires and the millionaires that are getting the tax cuts that are being prescribed by the Trump administration and by the GOP. That's just a fact. And if you look at the Congressional Black Caucus budget, for example, which does cut the deficit, does raise revenue, but it puts the burden on the billionaires, the wealthy, and the corporations.
It cuts the deficit lower than the CBO, but it still raises the deficit.
Well, but look, I mean, I think that the trajectory here, and Representative Scott is exactly right. We seem to have a pattern over the course of the last 4 or 5 presidencies where the deficit explodes under Republicans and is brought back under control by Democrats, and then now we're in the first budget of the Trump administration, and we're going back to the same formula that led to exploding deficits. So it's a strange pattern that we see where Republicans only seem to care about the deficit when Democrats are president, and that forces these kinds of cuts that we saw or that we don't want to see in the domestic programs. But the military never seems to take a hit. We spend so much more than any other country on our military. And the notion that we need to have a massive increase in defense spending right now, I don't think is borne out by the facts at all about the security threats that the country faces. And that when you look at what is going on in Middle America, what was going on in Middle America over the course of this last campaign, the notion that we're going to do things like cut rural airports or cut Meals on Wheels or cut programs that help the elderly and the poor. It just seems like a strange set of priorities for this administration.
Final comment, Congressman Scott.
It's choices. If you look right in the repeal Obamacare bill, there's $600 billion in tax cuts. Look at if you get a little bit for this, a little bit for that. If you cut that maybe to $500 billion, you could cover all of the EPA, the HUD, education, transportation. I mean, there are a lot of things that you could restore if you didn't cut taxes. But when you start off with a tax cut, and then look and see the draconian cuts that you have to inflict on the public.
Got a tax cut for the billionaires and millionaires, right?
Exactly.
All right, I appreciate it, sir. Thanks a bunch. A peaceful protest turned deadly. 37-year-old black man was shot and killed by Baton Rouge police. His hands are in the air, and you still get shot by the cops.
Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
We're not going to let hate define us.
Race is a big part of this.
If truly all lives matter, then all lives need to matter equally.
What we require is action. What we require is accountability. We understand that black lives do matter, and we will keep focused on this issue.
NewsOne Now, every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.